Samara Thorne's breath came in short, shallow gasps as the jungle around her closed in like a vice. The air was thick with humidity, and the pungent stench of decay mixed with the distant echoes of alien cries. Her fingers tightened around the grip of her pulse rifle as her booted feet crunched through the underbrush, every step a calculated move to keep from alerting the enemy. She was alone now. The rest of her squad had scattered to cover different sectors of the jungle, but Samara wasn't worried, at least, not for them. The Scracks were coming. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach, a gnawing certainty. After weeks of hunting, they had finally tracked her here. And Ixar, the Scracks' huntmaster, was at the front of it. He'd been watching her. Stalking her. Waiting for the right moment. Samara gritted her teeth. The maniacal predator had crossed paths with her more times than she cared to count, and she knew, deep down, that this wasn't going to be like the others. This time, it would end. She slowed her pace, moving behind a massive tree with bark-like thick scales. Her rifle was positioned against her shoulder, the safety off, ready for whatever came next. The moment her feet shifted, a sharp snap echoed through the trees, the sound of a twig breaking under pressure. Instantly, her senses went on high alert. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. From the corner of her eye, a massive shadow swept through the mist. It wasn't a human, and it certainly wasn't any creature from this planet. Samara's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay calm, to trust her instincts. The Scracks' huntmaster. Ixar was here. A screech split the air, and Samara barely had time to react. The ground shook as a massive form crashed through the underbrush, its sharp claws digging into the earth. Before she could even pull the trigger, Ixar's hulking figure emerged from the mist, his glowing red eyes locking onto her. A guttural growl rumbled in his chest, and Samara didn't waste a second. Her rifle spat fire, sending rounds slamming into his armored hide, but the impact barely slowed him down. "You've been a worthy challenge, human," Ixar's voice rang out, dripping with mocking amusement. His massive jaws parted in a cruel smile. "But the game ends here." Samara didn't flinch. Instead, she dropped into a crouch, pivoting sharply as she aimed for his throat. Her pulse was steady, her movements fluid, calculating. But it was too late. With a terrifying roar, Ixar leapt, his claws slashing through the air like a predator in its prime. Samara twisted, but not fast enough. One claw raked across her ribs with a sickening crack, and she gritted her teeth against the searing pain. Her breath was knocked from her chest, but there was no time to react to it. Not now. She could feel the blood flowing beneath her armor, the sharpness of the wound pulsing with every breath, but Samara didn't let it slow her down. Her body burned with adrenaline, and her grip on her rifle tightened. The pain was nothing compared to the fury building inside her chest. Ixar grinned, savoring her moment of weakness, but Samara's eyes narrowed. She couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. Not ever. With a guttural roar of her own, Samara dove beneath his outstretched arm, using the pain in her ribs as fuel. She spun, rolling onto her feet in one fluid motion. Her rifle was forgotten, tossed aside in favor of the combat knives at her waist. They gleamed in the low light, ready for their true purpose. Ixar spun around with a roar, eyes blazing with rage as he brought his claws down in another strike. But Samara was faster. She ducked low, then lunged upward, driving the first knife into the soft spot beneath his jaw. The blade sank deep into flesh, but the Scracks' tough hide wasn't enough to stop the strike. His mouth opened in a silent snarl, but Samara wasn't finished. With a sharp twist, she pulled the knife free, blood spraying across the jungle floor. The huntmaster's grip loosened on her, just for a second, enough for her to use her remaining strength to leap behind him. Her second knife flashed through the air. This time, it drove into the tender flesh of his throat, cutting through sinew and muscle with brutal efficiency. The Scracks' huntmaster froze, his body shuddering with the shock of the fatal blow. His glowing red eyes locked onto Samara's, disbelief flooding them as the life began to drain from his massive form. Samara didn't give him the satisfaction of watching him die. She had no need for that. She stepped back as he crumpled to the ground, a hissing sound escaping his dying mouth. His once proud figure now lay motionless in the dirt, his blood pooling beneath him like a dark omen. Samara wiped her blade on his armored skin, her breath steadying now that the immediate threat was gone. But as the adrenaline began to fade, a terrible realization gnawed at her mind. The fight wasn't over. Ixar's death was just the beginning. She turned away from the fallen beast and checked her comms. Static filled her earpiece, then the crackling voice of Lieutenant Harper cut through. "Sergeant, do you copy? We've got problems, there's a second wave coming in, and they're bringing more heavy artillery." Samara's jaw clenched. She had been hoping for a moment of respite, but it was clear now that the Scracks were not done. Ixar was gone, but the Huntmaster's second-in-command, Zyril, would not let her victory go unanswered. "Understood," Samara replied, her voice cold, her words clipped. "We fight. We survive." There was no room for doubt, no time for weakness. The battle was far from over, and Samara knew what she had to do. She'd take down Zyril. She'd take down every last one of them. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore, it was about survival. And she was prepared to do whatever it took to win. Samara's breath still came in shallow bursts, the remnants of the fight with Ixar buzzing in her veins. His body lay behind her, a still testament to the battle's brutal finality. But she couldn't linger. Not now. "Sergeant, do you copy?" The voice crackled in her earpiece, rough, distorted. It was Harper, her squad's communications officer. "We've got a major problem. Second wave incoming. Fast." She exhaled sharply, her gaze flicking over the dense jungle, the trees closing in, suffocating the world with their towering shadows. Her fingers brushed the wound on her side, where the Scrax's claws had torn through her armor. Blood seeped between her fingers, but it wasn't enough to make her falter. She knew this was far from over. Zyril, Ixar's second-in-command, would want revenge. Samara had no illusions about that. "Harper, I'm on my way." Her voice was tight, calculated. She moved quickly, stepping over the fallen Scrax's body with a grimace. The scent of blood in the air, both hers and Ixar's, made her stomach twist, but there was no time to indulge the feeling. The jungle ahead of her felt too quiet. Too still. The birds and insects had gone silent, as though they, too, were aware of the carnage that had taken place. Samara moved deeper into the thick undergrowth, her every step deliberate, her mind already racing through the next steps. She needed to reach her squad, and she needed to do it fast. Her boots crunched through the forest floor, the sound swallowed by the dense foliage. The adrenaline from the fight still surged in her, but now, it had morphed into something else, a cool, methodical focus. She wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting to ensure her team did, too. The radio crackled again. "Sergeant, we've encountered heavy resistance. They're already here. Zyril's leading them, and he's got a damn army at his back. We're holding them off, but barely. You need to hurry." Samara's pace quickened. The sound of gunfire echoed in the distance, sharp and jarring. Her squad was in trouble. She had to get there. Her fingers gripped the pulse rifle once more, instinctively checking the magazine, ensuring the weapon was ready for whatever was coming. A flicker of movement caught her eye, a shadow shifting in the periphery of her vision. Samara froze, her body tensing. There was no mistaking it. The Scracks were here. In the distance, she could hear the unmistakable rustle of heavy footsteps, followed by a low growl. The predators had been tracking her, and now, they were closing in. But it wasn't just any Scracks. It was Zyril, the one responsible for leading the wave of destruction. Samara felt the pit in her stomach tighten. The last thing she wanted was to be caught off guard again. She reached up to adjust her helmet, pulling it down firmly over her head, ensuring full tactical visibility. The enhanced optics lit up her field of vision, marking the targets she couldn't see. But she could already feel the weight of Zyril's presence, a predator's aura, thick and heavy, pressing in on her. Her comms buzzed again. "Sergeant, they're closing in fast. We've got a countdown to extraction. Hold on, just hold on." Samara didn't need to hear more. She knew the stakes. Extraction was a distant hope if they couldn't repel the Scracks. And Zeril wouldn't allow them to escape so easily. She crouched low, moving swiftly towards the gunfire's origin. The jungle felt like it was closing in around her. The mist that clung to the trees seemed to have a life of its own, swirling and shifting like a living thing, trying to obscure her every movement. But Samara was a soldier, trained to survive in environments like this. Her mind worked like a machine, calculating risks, estimating distances, weighing her options. A rustle came from the left. Too fast. Samara pivoted, ducking into a roll as a massive figure slammed into the ground where she'd been standing just a second before. The force of the impact rattled the trees. Zeril, larger and more vicious than Ixar, stood in front of her, his red eyes gleaming with malice. He was a monster, his frame covered in even thicker armor than his predecessors, his jagged claws stained with blood. "Did you think you could kill Ixar and walk away?" Zeril's voice was low, the vibration of it a growl that seemed to come from deep within his chest. "You're nothing but prey. And now, I'll make you suffer." Samara's heart rate barely flickered. She knew how to handle this. She had to. "Is that so?" She didn't wait for a response, lunging forward in one swift movement, her combat knife flashing as it slashed at his throat. But Zeril was faster. His clawed hand shot out, grabbing her by the wrist, squeezing until she heard a snap. Pain exploded through her arm, but she didn't stop. She twisted her body, using the momentum to land a brutal kick to his chest, sending him staggering back. "You'll die like all the rest," Zeril hissed, his claws raised for another attack. Samara's eyes narrowed. Not today. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the men and women who had trusted her to lead. For the future of humanity. She had a responsibility, one she wouldn't let slip through her fingers. Not while she had the strength to fight. With a sharp breath, Samara lunged once more, but this time, she used her broken arm to feint, drawing Zeril's attention to it. As he took the bait, she spun, bringing her remaining knife in a deadly arc across his side. The blade sank deep into his flesh, but it didn't kill him. Zeril roared, his rage filling the jungle. "You're a fool." But Samara didn't wait. She knew Zeril's strength. She knew he would retaliate. And she wasn't about to give him that chance. She threw herself backward into the brush, barely avoiding his retaliatory strike. The jungle seemed to part around her, and with a final, desperate glance, Samara reached for her comms. "Harper, we need that extraction now. Get the team out of here. I'll hold them off." The silence on the other end of the line felt like 1,000 years. Then, Harper's voice crackled back. "Understood. Just stay alive, Sergeant." The battle had only just begun. The jungle had become a blur of shadows and chaos. Samara's pulse was a steady hum in her ears, each beat pushing her forward, each breath a painful reminder of her injuries. Her side ached, the wound still fresh and deep, but she could no longer afford to think about it. Zeril's roar still echoed in the back of her mind, the sound of rage and hunger that threatened to consume everything in its path. He was coming. Samara crouched low behind a large fern, her pulse rifle now in hand, the weight of it familiar, grounding. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and alien blood, and she could hear the distant crackle of her squad's gunfire, now muffled by the oppressive jungle around her. They were fighting for their lives. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. "Harper, any update on extraction?" Samara's voice was rough, barely above a whisper, but the comm crackled back to life almost instantly. "We're 3 minutes out, Sergeant, but Zeril's forces are closing in fast. We can't wait any longer." Harper's voice was tight, strained, he was fighting to keep it together. But Samara could hear the fear in his words. He was never one to sound rattled, but this was different. The Scracks were overwhelming them, and she had no intention of letting them fall. Understood, Samara muttered, her eyes scanning the jungle for movement. The dense mist made it impossible to see more than a few meters in any direction, but she knew Zeril was somewhere out there, watching. Waiting. The crack of a branch underfoot shattered the silence, and Samara immediately tensed. From the corner of her eye, a blur of movement darted between the trees. The unmistakable shape of a Skrak soldier, faster than the others, more vicious, Zeril's elite squad. Without hesitation, Samara brought her rifle up, firing a burst that tore through the underbrush. The Skrak soldier screeched, a high-pitched, almost inhuman sound, before crumpling to the ground. But the shot only served to draw more attention. From the depths of the jungle, Zeril's voice rang out, deep and guttural, like thunder rolling through a storm. The human dares to fight back. She will die here, and we will feast on her carcass. Samara's lips curled into a grim smile. He was too sure of himself. The momentary fear that had gripped her was gone now, replaced with a cold clarity. She had one chance. One last shot to take down the Skrak's huntmaster and end this madness. She wouldn't run. She checked her wristband, the digital timer ticking down relentlessly. 2 minutes. A rustling from behind her made her spin, but it was too late. Zeril's massive form lunged from the shadows, claws slashing the air with terrifying speed. Samara barely managed to duck beneath the first strike, the force of it sending a tremor through her bones. She was fast, but not fast enough. Zeril's claws grazed her shoulder, leaving a deep gash that burned with the intensity of the alien venom coursing through it. Samara's teeth ground together, but she didn't back down. She couldn't. Her hand dropped instinctively to the knife at her side, the blade gleaming under the dim light. "Is this how you die?" Zeril taunted, his voice low and dripping with venom. "Bleeding out like a weakling in the jungle? No fight, no honor." His words were meant to sting, to make her falter, but Samara's anger was the fire that kept her going. The Skraks had taken everything from her, her family, her world, and now, they would take no more. With a roar of her own, Samara surged forward, diving beneath Zeril's next swing. She used her momentum, sliding across the jungle floor, and with one smooth motion, she buried the knife deep into the side of his armored torso. The blade hit its mark, and Zeril recoiled, a hiss escaping him as the wound began to bleed dark, thick blood. "Not today, Zeril," Samara growled, her voice steady despite the fire of pain in her side. Zeril's eyes widened with rage, but there was something else there, a flicker of respect. "You are a warrior, human," he rumbled, his voice low, grudging. "But you cannot defeat me." Samara didn't flinch at his words. Instead, she tore the knife free and spun, her rifle coming up in the same fluid motion. She fired 2 quick shots, the energy bolts lighting up the surrounding jungle. But Zeril was too fast. He twisted, dodging the blasts with inhuman agility. The air sizzled as the shots missed, embedding themselves in the bark of nearby trees. With a savage roar, Zeril closed the distance between them, his massive claws slashing through the air with terrifying speed. Samara barely had time to react, but she knew what she had to do. She dove beneath him, hitting the ground with a roll that sent her hurtling into a patch of thick vines. Zeril's form loomed above her, his eyes burning with fury. "I will not be denied. You die here, human." He raised his claws high, preparing for the final blow, but Samara had anticipated his move. Her hand shot out, grasping the pulse grenade at her waist. She primed it and tossed it directly beneath his feet. The explosion was deafening. For a moment, everything was white. The shockwave threw Samara to the ground, her vision spinning, her ears ringing with the roar of the blast. The jungle trembled, trees shaking as the force reverberated through the ground. Samara lay motionless, dazed, as the smoke began to clear. When her vision returned, she saw Zeril lying in a heap, his massive form still unbroken. The grenade had done its job, his armor was shattered, his body lying half-conscious in the debris. Samara forced herself to stand, her body protesting the movement. She was bleeding, bruised, and exhausted, but there was no choice now. She staggered toward Zeril, her rifle gripped in her trembling hands, and aimed it directly at his head. "You're finished," she whispered, her voice harsh. Zeral's eyes flickered, a low snarl escaping his lips. "You may have won, but the war will never end." Samara didn't wait for him to finish. She squeezed the trigger, the pulse of the rifle sending a shot straight through his skull. As Zeral's body slumped lifeless to the ground, Samara allowed herself a moment of silence. The jungle, once filled with the sounds of battle, was now eerily quiet. Her squad's voices came through the comms once again, faint but relieved. "Sergeant, we're inbound. Hang on, we're coming for you." Samara's fingers brushed against the blood on her side as she turned toward the sound of the extraction. Her body felt as though it was breaking under the strain, but she'd done it. She had survived. And the war, it wasn't over. Not yet. But today, she had won.